So here we have a document regarding force feeding, the government's kind of primary response really in the first instance to hunger striking of suffrage supporters. And in this document we have some of the kind of personal testimonies that are submitted by the Women's Social and Political Union regarding the experiences of force feeding. So some of the perspectives are from qualified doctors, but also from just individuals involved. So here we have a statement by Mary Richardson, best known for slashing the Rokeby Venus painting. And we can kind of read through some of it to get the sense of how this personally affected her, the experience of being force-fed in prison at this kind of time. So it starts saying, "Force feeding is to my mind one of the worst forms of torture imaginable, for it combines the brutal and the prolonged, the subtle element of torture in any age. The attack is brutal, the method primitive, it is prolonged in that it breaks the nerves down as well as the muscles. That is, of course, a slower process and more terrible. The process of driving the tube through the nose is very terrible, as the tube is usually too large for the nasal cavity, and when there appears to be any obstruction, more and more violent pushing is resorted to. On one occasion, Dr. Pearson almost tore my nose in his repeated efforts to force the tube through the opening, merely because he did not take pains to locate the nasal throat cavity carefully. When I remonstrated, he replied, 'There is congestion and I must force it through.' After 30 times of nasal feeding, my face, eyes and nose were so swollen and bruised that Dr. Pearson brought in a Home Office special, and after consultation he announced that he would feed me by the throat tube thereafter. I refused to be so fed and set my teeth together, whereupon he ran his second finger through my lips, cutting them, and then, finding the extremity of my jaw, he deliberately cut my cheek with his fingernail. I cried out at his cruelty, but he continued until, in agony, my teeth were parted and a metal spring gag inserted, followed by the feeding tube." It kind of gets worse and worse.
I know, I was going to say that's quite horrific.
It's pretty full on. Yeah, so very graphic accounts.
Yeah.
So here we have an account by Dr. Flora Murray, who supported particularly women when they came out of prison, who'd been released after hunger striking, to help them kind of recuperate in convalescence homes. This particular one that she worked in was in Notting Hill. And we have a sense of her report to the Home Office about the conditions that these women were facing. I say women, but she does state that there are 3 men that have also been force-fed, and of the 1,240 suffragists, or she says suffragists, that were sent to prison at this time, 165 were force-fed. So it's a huge number of people going through this process and this horrific ordeal. And so we have kind of repeated records that relate to that experience in the prisons. And her report really picks up partly where this was taking place, and it was happening at prisons across the country: Bristol, Liverpool, Dublin, Holloway, Pentonville. But also she really looks into the consequences of the force feeding, and a lot of that wasn't necessarily immediate consequences. So some of that was suffered afterwards. So there was things like exhaustion, collapse, weakness, nervous shock, headache, insomnia, loss of voice, soreness and swelling of the throat, lacerations of the nose and gums. So there's a real kind of list of impacts: bruises, scratches, abrasions to the skin. And indeed, I think what sometimes gets missed, looking at the experiences of suffrage campaigners who were forcibly fed, is the long-term effects. And so people such as Miss Clark, Emmeline Pankhurst's sister, has thought to have died really as a consequence of force feeding experienced after the Black Friday protest. So many of these kind of impacts were long-term health impacts that influenced suffrage campaigners' lives, and in some instances did potentially lead to death.